Well, sir, let's talk about Harvest Hills.
Sure.
This is the third time, not completed, but the third time that a golf course redevelopment has come to council. Are you noticing any patterns?
Well, there's one more yet to come. So it is an interesting question. Many golf course developers tell us that the sport is in decline. Nonetheless, people are investing in building new golf courses. Certainly, folks who bought a house backing onto a golf course thought it would be there forever. But on the other hand, we can't really force anybody to run any particular kind of business in any particular space. So it leads to lots of interesting questions for council. We've had a lot of community feedback on this. And what's interesting about this one, which is different than, for example, what we've heard in Highland Park, is a lot of the feedback is just leave it the way it is. In Highland Park, a lot of the feedback is we don't mind redevelopment, but not what's being proposed. So they're subtly different, but they are different. So we'll have to ask lots of questions today.
When you have these questions of clarification, do you think the people opposed and the audience members are listening to this information? Because a lot of times when they make the public presentation, they're dealing with information that you guys have asked questions about.
Yeah, we normally don't get into very, very deeply into questions to administration prior to the public hearing. Today we actually did, precisely in the hopes that some of the information would get out both to the proponents and the opponents prior to the public hearing. It never works.
What are your thoughts about the fact that there was a whistleblower complaint and it is somehow being investigated?
I asked the question last week about whether that should impact whether or not we should go forward with the public hearing today. And the answer really was you don't want to live in a system where anybody who files any whistleblower complaint holds up a process that has been advertised, that has been properly brought to a public hearing. And I've got some sympathy for that argument. I don't understand that there's a lot of legitimacy to that whistleblower complaint, but that is the job of the whistleblower department to figure out if it works or not.
You still have a public hearing to get through, and you have to keep an open mind, but from the questions to administration, how confident are you that all the city rules are being followed with the application?
Oh, I know that all the city rules have been followed, absolutely. However, there is an interesting question here, which is that the city asked the developer for a whole bunch of changes, and very few of them were made. And so I'll be asking the developer when they come up a number of very specific questions about why they felt they couldn't make those changes.
Late last week, the city charter document kind of came out, the first look that everyone has had on what kind of powers, other than taxation and the hot button ones. There's a lot on there, especially with transportation. And I know council has voted against 40 kilometers an hour, but do you think the transportation item there that could be revisited?
Yeah, so generally, yes, I'm very pleased that the province has been so flexible on the charter. I know there's some real eye-watering stuff in there about assessment and taxation and other things, but it's actually really important. It cuts bureaucracy, it cuts red tape, it allows us to serve citizens better. On the very specific question of speed limits, I think a number of members of council were not interested in pursuing that unless we had the power to change it. They didn't want to waste their time in pursuing it without that. So should we have the power to vary speed limits within our boundaries, I imagine there'll be a big conversation about whether that's the right thing to do.
Unclear if you'll get to it today, but the carbon levy, there's a report pegging that cost to the city at $6 million.
Minimum.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? And just speaking about, the number seems to be a lot more than you had estimated at the very beginning.
Yeah, my point of view on this has not changed. I think that it is extremely bad tax policy for one order of government to tax another order of government. We don't pay GST as the city, for example. We get a rebate on the GST that we pay. Because if you're taxing another order of government, the only thing you can do is pass that tax on to citizens. And that's hardly transparent. So if you need the revenue, government of Alberta, then increase the levy on everybody, but don't do it through the back door by doing it on the city and forcing the city to raise taxes or fees in order to pay for it.
And I realize you've been in a meeting, but the Prime Minister announced his version of the carbon tax this morning. Have you had a chance to have a look?
I have not, because I've been in a meeting, but I understand that the Premier has suggested that any national carbon policy must be tied to the building of energy infrastructure. Good for her. This is exactly right. Climate change has to be done in conjunction with the building of infrastructure to make sure we can get our energy to market.
That said, any thoughts about the $50 figure by 2022?
Wow, that's high. I believe that the Alberta levy is, if I'm not mistaken, $20 in 2016 and $30 in 2017. And again, we're going to have trouble at the city, unless there's an exemption or a rebate, dealing with that. If that goes up to $50, then the impact on people's property taxes and/or transit fares and other user fees will be extraordinary.